So just a little bit about who I am. I'm Adam Bowles. I've been running a marketing and technology strategy agency for the last 15 years. I put this webinar together and I've started doing these so that we can help clients see what goes into some of the strategies that are provided and some of the technology decisions that they are making. These webinars are going to be very agnostic. They are not things that you need to work with ACT360 specifically with. You can do them yourselves or you can do them with your existing providers. And I know these topics really, really well, but I'll also say this is my first webinar, so please go easy on me. I have lots of information in here for us to cover and to work through as we move along. So my agenda and plan for this is I'm aiming for going through our options for about 20 minutes. And then I'll leave 10 minutes at the end of this for any questions and such that might come up. Three main topics that I'm wanting to cover in this are VPNs, how they work and when you should be using them, cloud computing, same type of thing, and file hosting services. The biggest thing I'll say as we go into this is all of these technologies work great for allowing people to work from home. The biggest thing to consider is what the person working remotely actually needs to do and how they interact with that and what their tolerance is for different issues in their tech savvy level. Different solutions and different programs can do different things, and we need to just make sure that that will work. So diving into the VPN side, the easy way to look at what a VPN does is it connects your computer or network to a remote network, allowing you to work as if you were in the building of that computer. So this works really well for Office documents because it lets you connect to the local file share and lets you roll through that way really easily. It also can work okay for some accounting programs. Sage sometimes works pretty good through a VPN. QuickBooks, on the other hand, outright does not support VPNs and tends to not work really well on it at all. The problem with QuickBooks is the slightest amount of internet issues or data blips, and QuickBooks will corrupt the file. So if you're going to try QuickBooks over a VPN, just make sure you have really good backups. It'll work good some days when the internet's great, and you'll have more volatility other days. AutoCAD is another one that they support technically VPNs. Sorry, they don't support VPNs, but we have used it with a good number of clients, and with the right VPN tools, it can work just fine. So on the note of good VPN tools, there's a lot of different types of VPNs out there. So you can do router-based VPNs, which is basically joining two networks together. So what that would mean is you would go out and you would buy, say, two Meraki router units and connect the two different offices into one great big network. And that can be really good because it means that you can just function as if you were local and away things go. Your other direction is client-based, where you just connect a single computer to a router or to a server, and that lets people in. Kind of as I alluded to, though, with the programs, some of the challenges with VPNs that we often see is reliability. Setup requires very specific configuration. It's almost always issues in the setup that cause problems. One of the things that people we find when they're doing VPNs don't realize is when you're trying to connect from one to another, there has to be some consistent way for the two routers to know to talk to each other. And so what a lot of the router companies are doing is they provide a service that gives you basically like a website domain name to identify your two locations. And that is how the two of them talk to each other. If you set that up, that solves a lot of issues, and especially when you're not on a business network. If you go with free tools, the setup is a lot more difficult. If you buy some of the more paid products, they have really good setup and really good reliability. We've been using Cisco AnyConnect for AutoCAD, and it has been working fantastic. It allows everybody to access their files, it lets them work local, and away they go. Some of the other things, we've seen people where they can't access resources after setup and they're slow. Again, it's all just configuration. Most of the time, one of the big issues that we see is the router that's at the home or the client end is set up the same way as the business, and that actually causes the two of them to conflict. So when you're doing this, we just have to make sure things are set up so that way they're unique. Any questions on this on VPNs before I get into the cloud computing aspect and how that can let people work from home? You should have a Q&A tab across the top, or you can actually, looks like you can message and chat through here. Okay, I will go on. So cloud computing. So what this is instead of connecting to another network, you're actually basically connecting to a computer that's located somewhere else, and you're using the power and resources of that computer. So the nice part of that is it means that that computer is local to all the other issues. So that solves the issue of QuickBooks not liking to work on VPNs and having very little tolerance for any internet issues because it's not going out over the internet. The cloud computer is. There's two kind of types to this. You have self-hosted platforms like VMware, Terminal Services, and Hyper-V. And then you also have cloud services, which is a really popular one right now that we're starting to use quite a bit is Azure Virtual Desktop. It's highly scalable and really flexible. The beautiful part of a service like Azure Virtual Desktop is you can make it extremely consistent. The computer resets every night. So you get a brand new, fresh machine every single day, no baggage, and you're able to configure it so that it can scale up and down. So quite often, VMware is a really good direction to go for self-hosting. It's used quite a bit, and both of these tools are really good. It's just picking which direction you want to go. Some of the common issues that we've seen, some programs won't work on some solutions. So for instance, you can't use AutoCAD through terminal services. The program is just not built for it. It will not do that. But you can use AutoCAD through VMware, Hyper-V, and even the Azure Virtual Desktop without an issue. So as I kind of said at the beginning, the biggest thing to know when you go to set someone and work up remotely is to come up with a list of what are the activities that this person has to do. The person and how they use the technology is far more important than the technology itself, because it can be having all these fancy bells and whistles are no good if they don't help someone achieve their job. Some of the other issues that we've seen is downtime. There's lots of parts to this setup. It's more complicated than just working on your local computer. So there's a little bit more to maintain. You have to make sure everything talks to each other properly. Updates can be a little bit more dicey. And the other thing that people don't take into account is, back to the people side, training is key. This is a setup that most people are not used to. And if we don't train people how to use it, they're going to really struggle with this technology. So when you're rolling out a big change like this and switching people to cloud, it's not difficult, but if we don't take the time to train them, we'll make it difficult, which is something that we really have to work for. Let me. So you can definitely use cloud computing for Office documents, but it's total overkill if you're only trying to do Office documents, unless you need insane security. One of the nice parts with cloud computing is nothing is stored on the client's computer. So if you're wanting your staff to use their own computers and kind of bring your own device type of thing, you can go cloud computing and nothing gets saved on their local devices, which means if they leave or you're concerned about security risks, you're in a really good spot because there's nothing on their machines. The other one, as I mentioned, accounting programs are fantastic because everything is local for them. AutoCAD can work well. The biggest tricky part is a lot of it is mouse control and interacting, drawing lines and drawing things and working with the program in that way. So keeping the latency, the delay between yourself and the server can be really tricky. It requires really good and really good stability. So the AutoCAD over cloud computing, you really have to watch. We've found that VMware is an amazing option for clients that want to go self-hosted and host their own cloud. It allows for a lot of scalability. Typically, the rule of thumb that I do for clients is if you have a lot of change and your network is you're adding users, you're growing really quickly, you're probably better off to go with a cloud solution because you can scale it up and down. And so you'll be economical because you're not paying for stuff up front and you can scale it to your current needs. If you're finding that you're pretty consistent, you're growing at a fairly slow pace and at a consistent pace, you might be better off to go with an in-house server because that will save you a fair amount of money in the long run. The hardware is not that expensive and the one-time setup's not that expensive, and you'll save money over the cloud providers. But if you have to grow, scale, and change, then you'll spend more money to make those changes than if you went cloud. So so this is where business planning and knowing where you're going can greatly affect which way you should go from a cost perspective. So moving into the last and probably my favorite direction is the file hosting services. So these are where your files are saved on a server located elsewhere, usually in a data center, and the files are accessed and edited online, or they're synced to your local computer. So this is absolutely amazing for office documents. I think all businesses at this point should be using some sort of file hosting services for their office documents. It means that you're not editing them on the server. You're able to have real-time collaboration in those documents so you can have multiple people editing them. And it gives you version control and tracking and history and all kinds of power that you just don't get with a local server. And with most cases with Google and with Microsoft Teams and OneDrive and emails, they're included in your licensing already. Same with Google, they include it with your Google Docs and Excel. Sheets. From an accounting program perspective, you can't use Sage and you shouldn't use Sage and QuickBooks through them. The problem is it's a file sync and those programs are not compatible. So while you could edit them, if someone else tries to open it and edit it, you'll either have to lock it or you'll just corrupt the file. AutoCAD, you have to use a proprietary system like AutoCAD Vault. AutoCAD Vault works in much the same way, but they've had to design it specifically to work for this. So yeah, those are the popular systems. The biggest thing with this is it's really easy to use. It gives a lot of control back to a small business to be able to manage the permissions and manage their files without having to pay for a server. It's extremely cost effective to set this up. There's very little cost to space and it's very easy to use. So for a small business, up to even 50 or 100 users, it removes a huge amount of overhead compared to having a server and managing it that way. So in a lot of cases, what we'll see is where someone will do a file hosting service for their documents, and then we might just do a terminal service for a QuickBooks or a Sage to serve up that one program that's not compatible, allowing for a lot more cost savings and keeping things really easy to use. Some of the common issues that we see with file hosting services that people don't think about on the surface is they can often take up too much local space. If you have 1.25 terabytes of data, we can't sync all of that to your local computer. It will fill it up. The server would have that much space usually, but not your computer. The cool part is with almost all of these file hosting platforms is that you're able to see all of the files in the cloud on your local computer, but it just shows a shortcut to them instead of the actual file. So when you double click on that file, it actually will open and download the file for you and then keep that file synced on your machine. So you can actively sync the stuff that you need local and everything else just gets placeholders, which is a really, really cool way to do this. And I personally use it extensively. The migration we see as being a huge issue. A lot of people just try to jump in and just copy everything local up to the cloud. Organizationally, that doesn't typically work because you've got different file shares. It is a slightly different platform. There's a lot more options in here. We need to plan it. Who needs access to what? What are the permissions that people need? Organize things down and make sure that it's easy to actually use. If we actually plan it, it'll make the training piece a lot easier because it'll feel very natural for different departments have their own spots and it'll make things feel natural so we don't have to train as much. The other piece that ties in with migration is with all of these file hosting platforms, they do not support special characters and they do not support long file paths. So that means that if you have a folder inside a folder inside a folder inside a folder, there's a limit to how often you can do that. And that will actually cause OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox, they will not be able to support it and they will not work. Special characters are also not supported, so we find often that we'll try and sync all this stuff up and we'll get 100 conflicts and have all kinds of problems with it. So this is where we recommend we need to actually go through and sort those issues out ahead of time and make sure that we're compatible with running things through file hosting. There are self-hosted options of these file hosting if you wanted to put it on a server. We see clients wanting to do that when they have things that are highly secure. They're not comfortable with the concept of cloud, but they want some of these features. Or maybe they're not using OneDrive and Office 365 and they're just not ready to have the extra cost yet. And you can actually put it on a server that you have and run this yourself. There's a good number of tools out there that support it. The tricky part is if it gets out of sync and something goes amok, you have to somehow merge the data back in from everyone. So you just have to be very careful and remember to back it up. Just because you're using these file hosting platforms, do not trust their backups explicitly. Microsoft does have bad days. In England, a couple of years ago, Microsoft had where one data center was backing up to another. So a lot of people thought they were in a great spot. Turns out those two data centers were on the 8th floor and the 10th floor. The entire building burnt down and they lost all the data centers. That means they lost all the backups because they were backing up from one data center to another. Backup outside. So in closing, lots of options to allow people to work anywhere. You really just have to plan based on the work they want to do. I see we're actually right on time for what I was looking for, aiming for about 20 minutes, so we had some time for questions. Otherwise, that was my presentation. Thank you for attending.